I find the Ukrainian spirit magnificent under siege. Everybody's on the street, they're, in restaurants, and they said this to me. We will not let the Russians disrupt our life in Ukraine. We will not give them that satisfaction.
Welcome to The Stakes. I'm Brad Rourke with the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan operating foundation that focuses on advancing and defending inclusive democracy. Today, I'm talking to Kettering Senior Fellow and retired Chief Justice of Ohio, Maureen O'Connor, and Kettering board member and Lincoln Filene Professor of Citizenship and Public Service at Tufts University's Tisch College of Civic Life, Peter Levine. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Peter, let's start with you. You recently wrote a blog post for our series, From Many We, recounting a week that you spent teaching civic studies in Ukraine. This was happening right around when Ukraine had just launched a major surprise offensive against Moscow. What was it like to be there at that time?
So, Brad, it's nice to be talking to you. I think it's very important to me to say that my experience is not like Ukrainians' experience. I mean, I was there for 5 days, and they've been there for they've been going through full-scale war for 3.5 years. But it's bad. It's hard. It's just relentless. A neighboring nation state is both trying to disrupt everything, so causing air raids multiple times a day at maximally inconvenient times, for example, at 4 a.m. so that you can't go back to sleep. We're all used to disruption, but the last few nights have been absolutely terrible. And in the neighborhood that I was staying in, a ballistic missile took out a whole apartment building. So it's hard. And the last thing I'll say is there's just a cumulative stress, I think, of just constantly making decisions. I mean, the air raid alerts go off 3 or 4 times a day, so every single one is a decision. Do I take this seriously? Do I not? But that's a micro stress point. You have these macro stress points, like, do I emigrate? Do I take a job here? Do I? And that's for civilians. There's obviously a terrible front, and lots of people who have loved ones on the front.
Chief O'Connor, you've been part of an international effort to help Ukraine stand up a constitutional court, a high court, which is a critical part of its bid, a required part of its bid to enter the European Union. So you've spent a fair amount of time in Kyiv too, and elsewhere, trying to help them build a critical sector of civil society and build rule of law while it's under siege. Thinking about the experience of being there, the effort that you're trying to put in, what are your takeaways?
Well, I've been doing this since November of 23, and I've on a panel. We're called the advisory group of experts. Our responsibility is to vet candidates for the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. And I might add, the Constitutional Court of Ukraine is in existence, but unfortunately it's not trusted, and it's really a target of reform. So we vet the candidates, and we are interviewing judges that are, currently on lower courts. We're interviewing academicians. The standard is, do they meet the high, moral code and integrity in order to be promoted to the Constitutional Court of Ukraine? Ukraine very much has their institutions, the mindset of the Soviet influence, and that is really, I think, an impediment to their reform. But they have wonderful organizations. These civil groups, they weigh in publicly about so much, but about what we do as well. Now, I might add that I find the Ukrainian spirit magnificent under siege. When I first came to Ukraine, everybody's on the street. They're in restaurants. They're doing shopping. They're at work. And their attitude, and they said this to me, we will not let the Russians disrupt our life in Ukraine. We will not give them that satisfaction. Ukraine wants reform. Right? I just want to, civil society wants reform, the institutions itself. This war is every facet of it. Even if you have not, been subject to a raid and I don't think there's anybody in Ukraine that hasn't. They're invested, and I'll just add, we do our work in a bomb shelter in the home in this hotel in Ukraine. One morning I was awoken by a missile strike a little over a mile from the hotel, and 4 people died. One person was incinerated in their car. It was terrible. I went down to the bomb shelter, obviously, and then we started our work at 9 a.m. with our interviews. And they remarked to me when they heard what happened that I'd heard the boom, boom, like sounds I'd never heard before. Now you Ukrainian. They have that attitude about, it was probably my 8th time in Ukraine, but, now you Ukrainian.
Yeah. Peter, I want to turn to you to reflect a little bit. You're an expert on civil society, both U.S. and a certain amount internationally as well. The point that the chief makes about the remnants of Soviet society, I'd love it if you'd reflect on that a little bit, on the challenge that Ukraine faces to rebuild or build that civil society and what we might learn from it.
Right. Well, one thing is what nobody's mentioned so far in this conversation. They did have 2 magnificent, not perfect, but magnificent grassroots, largely nonviolent revolutions in the last 25 years. So I always say they've earned their democracy in a way that I think is real. But the Soviet legacy, which is what you really asked about, I think has 2 parts. I mean, one is, of course, it was a dictatorship for decades and decades, and Ukrainians were part of that. I mean, it wasn't the Russian Empire, it was the Soviet Union. They were a Soviet republic. The other thing is, though, is also Russian dominance. I mean, my view, I'm not a Ukrainian nationalist. I'm a humanist. I believe everybody counts, including Russians. But I do think Russians, had an empire, and they certainly haven't reckoned with what it means, with the injustices that having an empire caused, coming out of a long period of being under an empire is a challenge for any country emerging from that.
I want to open this up to both of you. Actually, I have a question about sort of building upon the empire theme, and one of the hallmarks of a functioning democracy is an adherence to rule of law. Strikes me that, Chief, you're trying to help Ukraine stand up a muscular rule of law in society, and reflect on if there's takeaways from that effort that we can think about in the U.S. context, and then maybe open it up to Peter to think about that as well.
Well, the first step is to have for Ukraine, is to have the uninterrupted support of the EU members, and to build upon that. Why is that important? Psychologically, it's hugely important for Ukrainians. Just like the support from America, hugely psychologically, it's a psychological imperative. I just read something the other day that, Putin said wherever a Russian soldier walks is part of Russia. That is because he believes Ukraine is part of Russia, and he'll go back historically. But Ukrainians know they are not Russian. They have, their own language, their own history. And if you look at the history here, Stalin tried to annihilate the Ukrainians in the 30s by starvation. So no, they are not Russian.
Peter, reflect on what U.S. civil society can learn from Ukrainian civil society.
I mean, one answer to that is they've been facing challenges very explicitly and consciously that we now face more directly. So what one is specifically Russian propaganda. I think actually the effect of Russian propaganda on American voting is exaggerated, but we definitely have Russian propaganda hitting us. The other thing would just be how to deal with a kind of personally driven, corrupt leadership structure. I mean, when I first got to Ukraine, and I've been there a few times actually, but the West stood for things like rule of law and kind of appropriate procedures and human rights, and they've been struggling with that for quite a while. So in particular, I'm not saying we need a mass nonviolent revolution, but the nonviolent mobilization of Ukrainian civil society is something that we do need. The Maidan experience, basically.
And do you see that kind of evidence of those sorts of mobilizations in Ukraine too, or is the ongoing siege reduced that?
So this is one of the things that I struggle with a little because, generally speaking, I would believe in having a very robust debate in civil society and in the public. And there are things to be debated in Ukraine, like, for example, should we really sacrifice enormous lives to recapture Crimea, or should we compromise on that, or is President Zelensky our best available leader? Those conversations, I think, are fairly muted in Ukraine, and I think part of the reasons have to do with a kind of understandable psychology, and that worries me a little because I do believe in robust debate. So it's a reminder that war is a very difficult environment in which to have robust debate. But the other thing I want to say is I do think that there's a lot of disillusionment, I mean deep disillusionment with the United States, and a lot of, I think, wariness of the EU. That may in its own way be healthy. I mean, the Ukrainians need to own and do own their own country.
Chief, I'd like to end with you. How optimistic are you of the success of your effort to help the Ukrainians stand up, continue to reform their constitutional court?
Well, as I mentioned, it is an entity in existence. Unfortunately, they don't have a quorum right now. And as a result, they're not hearing cases. They're not doing any work of the court. The volume of cases they've heard in the past, the recent past, has been dismal. Keep in mind, this is 18 people, and this is the highest court in the country. Civil society recognizes it and wants these appointments made. I hear two things. Thank you for what you're doing, but they also say, as an American, you're here. You come to Ukraine, and that alone, someone like me, who doesn't have to, this isn't required. I traveled 2 days to get to Kyiv for a 2-day meeting. You go there, and like I experienced, and their attitude back to us is goodwill. I mean, it's real, it's genuine, and you can bring that back, and you're testifying to what life in Ukraine is really like, not through the eyes of the news or the sensational reporting. I visited a cemetery in Ukraine, in Kyiv, and as far as the eye could see, there was flags. There were flags of Ukraine, the blue and the gold, and some were black and red, and the black and red was the flag of Ukraine drenched in blood. That's what the symbol was. And it was a Sunday. And the survivors, the wives, the children, the parents, just standing at their sons' graves, mourning, it's choking me up now, talking about it. But that's the kind of moving experiences that I bring back and I talk to people about. And it resonates. And why do I do it? Because I think it then heightens our awareness, their awareness here in the U.S., which is important. Will Congress ever, respond accordingly? Will the president do what is right here? I don't know, but I'm not going to stop.
Me neither.
Kettering Senior Fellow and retired Chief Justice of Ohio Maureen O'Connor, Kettering board member and Lincoln Filene Professor of Citizenship and Public Service at Tufts University, Peter Levine, thank you for bearing witness, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Brad. It's a great opportunity.